Yeah, I guess I'd like to pick up on an issue that Kevin and David talked about. And it's the issue of the fact that this shouldn't have been a decision for the West Midlands Police or for Birmingham City Council. And I just want to go into a bit more detail as to why that's the case. And I think the starting point for examining that, it makes sense to look at what happened in Amsterdam. In Amsterdam in November last year, there were very serious problems with racism and violence. And what they underscored, I think, was a structural problem within the Israeli Football Association to tackle systematic racism. Now, why is that an issue? Well, it's an issue because in UEFA statutes, in Article 7, there is a very strong and clear requirement on member associations to have a strict policy in place to stamp out racism. Now, this makes a lot of sense if we see football as a potential force for social good. We need to get rid of these nefarious actors within the game. Now, the behaviour in Amsterdam suggested serious problems. There's no real need to go over it again, but we saw racist, provocative, thuggish behaviour from the Maccabi Tel Aviv fans, which led to all sorts of violence. I think it is important to point out to the fact that a lot of that violence that Maccabi fans were then subjected to did have an anti-Semitic character. There's absolutely no question about that, and that was revolting. But it was the Maccabi Tel Aviv fans who started it. Now, David talked very interestingly about Beitar and Beitar's long history of very serious racism. Beitar was always the club within Israel which had very close links to the far right, very close links to Netanyahu and the Likud government, and were seen as by far the most problematic club in Israel when it comes to systematic racism. The fact that you have Maccabi now coming onto a major European city and causing this level of unrest suggested serious problems within Israeli football that were extending beyond Beitar Jerusalem into other fan bases and worsening. There's a very interesting report which we managed to get our hands on a couple of weeks ago. And it was a report by an organization called Kick It Out Israel. Now, Kick It Out Israel have been going into Israeli stadiums for the last 3 years at a minimum and documenting instances of racist abuse. David mentioned the increase in racist incidents in Maccabi among the Maccabi Tel Aviv supporter base, and that is borne out by the report. The report talked about a 64% increase in racist incidents in the last season. It said that the racism incidents are now documented in 13 out of the 14 clubs within the Israeli division. And it said that the most significant increase was among Maccabi Tel Aviv fans. It also noted in the report that Maccabi Tel Aviv were never sanctioned by the Israeli Football Association for what happened in Amsterdam last November. Now, that's a serious problem. It was right of the Dutch police to prosecute those instances of anti-Semitism, and they did so. They went out, they arrested people, and they did their job. The Israeli Football Association did not do its job, nor did UEFA. UEFA said that it would investigate the violence in Amsterdam and apply the appropriate statutory sanctions. There is absolutely no sign that it has done that. It's completely dropped the ball where this is concerned. So there is a very clear basis within the UEFA statutes for Israeli teams to be sanctioned. And obviously, Israeli teams being kicked out of competition, has the knock-on effect that supporters don't travel. But the target is really the Football Association as a whole. As David said, I think there are further grounds for a ban on the Israeli Football Association. As David said, the FIFA statutes, could not be clearer on the fact that you are not allowed to play football matches in the territory of another member association. Israel has been doing that for a very long time. The Palestinian Football Association has been complaining about that since 2013. They submitted another complaint to FIFA in March 2024. And FIFA to date has done absolutely nothing and continues to talk about issues like whether or not the settlements are illegal in international law, a fact which has been entirely settled by the International Court of Justice, among other highly, highly credible bodies. So the idea that Israel should be out of competition the statutory basis is very clear in the UEFA statutes and the FIFA statutes, and the Amsterdam violence demonstrated that. I think it's also interesting to look at the fact that, when bans have been imposed on foreign fans, it's typically been UEFA who's done it. And there's very good reason for that, because it makes it a decision taken by the football authorities and prevents our police authorities getting drawn into the political controversy that we saw surrounding this match. So Red Star Belgrade fans and Eintracht Frankfurt fans were both banned from travelling to London in 2019. Kevin mentioned the Legia Warsaw ban, which happened after violence in Birmingham at an Aston Villa game. These are things that UEFA does. They basically say, to ensure that we don't have these problems, these supporters will not be allowed to travel. I think Kevin raised a really interesting point, and one that we really have to engage with. This idea of police overreach, this idea of allowing the police to become too involved in football is a problem, right? Because it's not something that we necessarily want. But I don't think we should be seeing this as a policing issue. And I think the controversy that has been allowed to grow has because of the abdication of responsibility of the footballing authorities. The point about this is, and the reason that UEFA has the statute, and the reason that we have organizations like Kick Racism Out of Football, the reason we have anti-racism campaigners around football is because football, as a sort of cultural and social phenomenon, can be an incredible force for social good, but it can also be an incredible force for real harm. That's why we have these policies to kick these things out. And when I think what you see in the case of Israel is you see endemic racism, you see systematic racism, you see increasing racism and violence, and you see the member association not doing anything at all to stamp that out. And you place that in a political context where football is incredibly political, and you have teams like Beitar Jerusalem with links to Netanyahu, links to the Likud party. And when you see a man like Itamar Ben-Gvir, who is in control of the Israeli police, which has a terrible record of cracking down on left-wing supporters like Maccabi Tel Aviv, when you consider that political context, I think it is imperative that UEFA step in. And I don't think we can also step away from the fact that this is taking place in the context of a genocide, in the context of the mass slaughter of Palestinians. Racism and the dehumanization of Palestinians is at the heart of that. So these things cannot and should not be linked. So the moral imperative for us to act on this is, of course, Gaza and what is happening there. But I think when we look to how do we enforce a ban, you have to go back to the statutes, and the statutes, I think, are very clear and argue strongly in favour of a ban.